Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Bible study for the 7th of July, 2021. My name is Pastor James Merriam, and I am one of the ministers at the United Church of Newport. And so I welcome you, and I bring you greetings and welcome you to this opportunity to dive a little bit more into a piece of scripture that we otherwise might not get the opportunity to. It's been a great week here in Newport, the wonderful fireworks, the wonderful 4th of July parade, and at last our long-awaited rain, though it's a little less summery than a lot of people would like. But we still have been having a couple of weeks now of full in-person worship, having a wonderful time on Sunday morning, so come join us at 9:30. All are welcome, and we'd be glad to have you. For tonight, we're going to be diving a little bit into a piece of scripture that's in the lectionary that would commonly be used in this coming Sunday. But it's sort of our tradition to only use one of the scriptures in the lectionary, and this is one of the others. So I'll be preaching about Amos this coming Sunday, a really deep, rich text. But we have another really deep, rich text, this one from 2 Samuel, and it's just a shame to not talk about it. It's a shame to not go into it, a shame to not look at it. We've had lots of great opportunities in the past and more coming up. A couple of weeks ago was the Methodist annual conference for New England, and they had the wonderful ordination service, because the Methodist tradition ordains all of the ministers for the whole conference for each year all together during the annual get-together, and it's really a cool worship. And there's a sort of abridged version, so it's a very long worship, but I cut it down, edited it down to sort of the essential components, and that's on our YouTube station. So you can, if you're watching this on YouTube, scroll down a little bit to find that. A wonderful time. Also coming up, starting this Sunday, will be UCC General Synod. That's the worldwide gathering of the UCC that's happening virtually. So there will be lots of great virtual worship experiences and lots of great components and just great talks and a wonderful gathering for the wider UCC, and we're looking forward to that very, very much. I'm also wearing my camp shirt. The last few years, last year, I was a camp counselor at the UCC camp that we put together in Burlington, right on Lake Champlain. Has been a wonderful experience, but I'm not going to be doing it this year, but we send best wishes to the Vermont UCC, and the New Hampshire UCC are collaborating on a camp in northern New Hampshire, and it's going to be a wonderful experience. I send my best wishes, especially to my old friend Ed Sunday Winters, who we've shared a cabin for quite some time. He's the pastor in Greensboro, and my old friend Jeffrey Tupper Giles from the Barry Congregational Church, who will be serving as the other counselor in the boys' cabin. And just to all the leadership and all the great leaders who have made outdoor ministry such a wonderful thing. So, our scripture today is from 2 Samuel, and it's chapter 6. We've jumped ahead quite a bit in time, or we've jumped ahead quite a bit in terms of verses. We have not jumped ahead really all that much in terms of time or the narrative, really, from the most recent things, hearing about David's ascent and conquest of Jerusalem, and the beginnings of the association between God and God's kingdom and the city of Jerusalem. So we're going to get really, really significantly into that association and that relationship and the difficulties associated with it. 2 Samuel chapter 6. We're just going to read the whole chapter. The lectionary does not include the whole chapter, but there's some difficult things to read, but we've got time, and it makes quite a compelling and flowing narrative. And David gathered again all the picked men of Israel, 30,000. And David arose and went, and all the troops who were with him, to Baalal in Judah, to bring up from there the ark of God, over which the name of the Lord of armies enthroned on the cherubim is called. And they mounted the ark of God on a new cart, and carried it off from the house of Abinadab, which is on the hill. And Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, were driving the cart, and Ahio was walking before the ark. And David and the whole house of Israel were playing before the Lord with all their might in songs on lyres and tambourines and castanets and cymbals. And they came to the threshing floor of Nacon, and Uzzah reached out to the ark of God and took hold of it, for the oxen had slipped. And the Lord's wrath flared up against Uzzah, and God struck him down there for reaching out his hand to the ark. And he died there by the ark of God, and David was incensed. because the Lord had burst out against Uzzah, and that place has been called Perez Uzzah to this day. And David was afraid of the Lord on that day, and said, "How can the ark of the Lord come to me?" And David did not want to remove the ark of the Lord to himself in the city of David. And David had it turned aside to the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite. And the ark of the Lord remained in the house of Obed-Edom 3 months. And the Lord blessed Obed-Edom and all his house. And it was told to King David, saying, "The Lord has blessed the house of Obed-Edom and all that he has on account of the ark of God." And David went and brought up the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with rejoicing. And it happened, when the bearers of the ark of the Lord had taken 6 steps, that he sacrificed a fatted bull. And David was whirling with all his might before the Lord, girt in a linen ephod. And David and his whole house of Israel were bringing up the ark of the Lord in shouts and with the sound of the ram's horn. And as the ark of the Lord came into the city of David, Michal, daughter of Saul, looked out through the window and saw King David leaping and whirling before the Lord, and she scorned him in her heart. And they brought the ark of the Lord and set it up in its place within the tent that David had pitched for it. And David offered up burnt offerings before the Lord and well-being sacrifices. And David finished offering up the burnt offerings and the well-being sacrifices, and he blessed the people in the name of the Lord of hosts. And he stared out to all the people, to all the multitude of Israel, every man and woman, he shared out 1 loaf of bread and 1 date cake and 1 raisin cake, and every one of the people went to his home. And David turned back to bless his house. And Michal, daughter of Saul, came out to meet David, and she said, "How honored today is the king of Israel, who has exposed himself today to the eyes of his servant slave girls, as some scurrilous fellow would expose himself." And David said to Michal, "Before the Lord, who chose me instead of your father, and instead of all his house, to appoint me prince over the Lord's people, over Israel, I will play before the Lord. And I will be dishonored still more than this, and will be debased in my own eyes. But with the slave girls about whom you spoke, with them let me be honored." And Michal, daughter of Saul, had no child till her dying day. So we have 2 narratives going at the same time. You have David falling out with Michal, daughter of Saul, and it's pointed out time and time again that she's Michal, daughter of Saul. Doesn't point out at any point she's also Queen Michal, wife of King David. Refers to him as king rather than husband, is never referred to as wife, and we have that little closing line that's left really quite ambiguous as to whether it's that she was cursed, that she was barren and never had any children, or if this was the final split between her and David, and so they never saw each other again. They never had any children together, and they never had any relationship of any kind after that point. Either way, it's kind of a full wrap on the character who played a pretty significant role in the earlier stages of David's life. And we have really kind of this cinematic backdrop. You can almost feel the camera swooping back, just as sort of the procession of bringing the ark to Jerusalem has finally really gotten going and is really going in spectacular fashion in this event that's really kind of highlighted and of one of the great moments in the history of the faith. The sort of triumphal entry into Jerusalem, of course, that Jesus conducts, but this is sort of the beginnings of all of that, the origin of all of that, and the moments and elements when Jerusalem becomes the central location for faith, but more than that, that any location becomes, the central location for faith. So this great procession, all the instruments, all the dancing, all the sacrifice, all of the incense, all of the magnificent events, and this great parade coming in across the landscape, not coming that far. It's not like hundreds of miles, but it's a good distance, certainly. And from this high window, the queen, with whom the king is very much on the outs and has been has no longer seen eye to eye for a long time, stares out in disdain for what she sees in the far distance, and does not dignify the procession with her, even with her presence. And then beyond that, to say, to some extent, justifying by the fact that she wasn't there, claiming and crying out that that the king has debased himself by both doing things that are undignified, but also this procession that is unbefitting of him because it did include everyone. And we have a contrast between, because at the very beginning, when the procession is just getting going, it's this translation, the Robert Alter translation here chooses the chosen men of Israel. Other translations have this being the elders or the significant or the leaders, and some even say it's more like the regiment of Israel turned out for this procession. But no, it's really it's about all the tribes being significantly represented by all their leaders, sort of from all stages of life and all walks of life. But when we enter into Jerusalem and when the ark is rededicated, it says everyone is there. So one could contest that this is an improvement from the first parade to the second parade, since the first parade was going well until things went very, very wrong. A 3-month break, and then the second parade that is all happiness and all goodness and all rejoicing and all celebration up until Michal tries to rain on that parade, but David says absolutely not interested, not going to happen, not going to be a part of this. And David said, "Before the Lord who chose me instead of your father, instead of all his house, to appoint me prince, I will play before the Lord, and I will be dishonored still more than this, and will be debased in my own eyes. But with the slave girl about whom you spoke, with them let me be honored." So I don't care what you think. I don't care what your house thinks. I don't care what any of the descendants of Saul or any of the old way or any of the elitist way or any of the exclusive way, all that got Israel into so much trouble for so long. No interest. Not going to continue. Don't care. It's quite a burn, really. It's sort of a prophetic and forever burn. Burn in the just being a really sharp, nice insult. So nice, David. Nice. You really got her. It's the end of the character. It's the break in a relationship, which is never something we rejoice in, certainly. But what is presented here is David, who not forgetting his roots, or at least coming this far without having forgotten his roots. Now, much more would happen in the story of David. We're really still pretty early in the second book of Samuel, so we're barely halfway through the story. And of course, David doesn't appear in the story until about halfway through the first book of Samuel. So we're really still pretty early. This is sort of the pinnacle of David's accomplishment. It's certainly the sort of pinnacle of the excitement of David's accomplishments. And there's much that will still come, much conflict, much difficulty. But David is enthroned, and the Ark of the Covenant, the seat of God's power, as it is described, specifically, over which, bring up from there the Ark of God, over which the name of the Lord of armies enthroned on the cherubim is called. So this sort of presents the Ark as it's often seen as being sort of a throne, or being like the resting place for the Spirit of God that hangs over it. And it's got so much power and so much significance and so much force and so much of the Spirit of God sort of just resting there and imbibing in it, that it is like electric with energy, such that when the man reaches out to try to keep the ark from falling, when the cart tips because one of the oxen stumble, he is struck down by the power of it for the shame of having even dared to touch the ark, even to assist it. And perhaps this can be read around with great difficulty to say that this is a over devotion to the thing rather than to the Spirit, but the whole story is about devotion to the thing. So this is a difficult thing to present. We do hear at the end, of course, that they're set up the ark in a tent, in the tabernacle, which just means big tent, on the top of Mount Zion, on what is now Jerusalem, or what is now actually just the outskirts of the city of Jerusalem. And that the ark, which had previously moved around fairly regularly, was meant to be mobile, had moved from place to place, and to some extent how Saul moved the ark around and moved the places of devotion around, and how he followed different practices was what actually ended his rule, was what lost his favor, how he lost favor in God's eyes. So difficult for us to imagine now, but here we have this grand procession, and the central event to this, and the event that we've sort of maybe more than anything else remember from this scripture. Actually, maybe because maybe because of the movie Footloose, is David dancing. David dancing, it would seem, for hours and hours and hours. David dancing on the road with all the instruments and all the singers and all the drumming and all of the everything. There's a funny note included that along the way that this story is told multiple times, since we have multiple different versions of the Old Testament. And then it's also told in the Book of Chronicles, which is a retelling of the story of Samuel and Kings, with sort of the more like an official story, like the state media story that takes out all the bad parts. And so we have a couple of different stories, and a couple of them get kind of confused, it would seem, in translation of keeping things together, of a reference actually to what we talked about last week, of what the instruments were made of. And they sort of forget to include, or neglect to include, what instruments were there and what music was playing, as we hear here, and rather focus on how expensive the wood out of which the instruments were made. So be you assured, there's a lot of music, there are a lot of instruments, and they're really excellent instruments. Excellent instruments, really the finest quality, made out of the finest cedar wood from Lebanon. So partway along, this tragedy befalls. The ark is about to slip. The cart driver reaches out to save it. He is struck down by the power of God in God's wrath, and as a result of David's wrath about how badly things have gone, and it seems like David has lost confidence, even after all that he's been through and all that he's seen. He's lost confidence that maybe that he's worthy, or that he can control this power, or that this power is out of control. David was incensed. How can the ark of the Lord come to me? And David did not want to remove the ark of the Lord to himself in the city of David. David had it turned aside. And then, so to some extent, we don't get a good context for this. It's a pretty obscure reference, but they take the ark to a local person who they who they think can probably handle the situation, but also who's kind of disposable. This local person, Obed-Edom the Gittite. So this is a person of some standing and some stature who's proved himself to be loyal through previous service, but is a foreigner. So it's, if anything, that here let's leave the ark somewhere for a while. Maybe the ark is like hot and angry and is gonna lash out too soon and too dramatically. So let's put this somewhere out of the way for a little bit. And in 3 months, God has the power. The ark has the power, and it's shown that this is not just that the ark is lashing out at random, but the ark is through the ark, God blesses this particular household and his whole extended family wherever they are very richly, and everyone knows it, and it's clear that it's because of the ark. So one bad thing, one good thing cancel each other out enough, I guess, in David's mind. And so David now ups the level of the procession even more. Instead of the 30,000 that had gone before, that had come with him before, the 30,000 of the picked men, the leaders of Israel, he has basically everyone. He has this enormous crowd that represents all the ranks and branches of Israeli society. And so this is a step up in a number of ways, and may actually be even more symbolic, because the number 30,000 represents, or is presented, and it may be an exaggeration here, and it may have been an exaggeration a few chapters earlier, when there's said to have been a battle with the Philistines, where the ark is captured and taken away for a while, and it's said that 30,000 Israeli soldiers were lost in that battle. So this is sort of the comeuppance, the 30,000 to replace those 30,000 that we've come back, this symbolic return and almost boast in that particular way. So perhaps that was the problem. Perhaps that there was too much in the symbolism, was boasting and exclusivity. That's kind of a hard, long, roundabout way to read this. But, it's something. Now, David was dancing, music was playing, everyone was shouting and celebrating, horns were blowing. So David is playing a double role, one that's very much unheard of in our own time, but was pretty common in their time. He's playing the role of both king and of priest, and to some extent that's sort of maybe the source of his struggle with and his difficulty with his wife, that the actions of a priest, which in some instances are to be sort of extraordinary and dramatic and way over the top with things, are very much in contrast to the necessary role of the king, which is sort of to be moderate and intermediate and then decisive in action. So he's all over the place. He's dancing like mad. We can imagine this. He dances for this long time. Probably a very long and very exhausting day for David. David dances and the music plays, and this is the day. This is the foremost day when, as the Psalms say, and as our hymns say, and really as sort of all of our hymns try to live up to and be inspired to, every song, every voice, and every instrument will praise the name of the Lord. Actually, every one is in reference to that. The ark is in Jerusalem, the king is in Jerusalem, all is set and steady and ready for the next stage. So, dear ones, I hope you're having a wonderful summer. Hope you are all well. God bless you, and we'll see you again soon.